Ridge's hand closed around Brooke's wrist as though it were the only lifeline in a world gone mad, and before Nick could even cry out her name, he yanked her toward the marina with a determined urgency that left their guests gaping in stunned silence. The arches of cobblestone pathways and the lantern-lit docks blurred past as Ridge half dragged her toward his father's sleek white yacht, the Starlight Intrigue, its engines idling like a restless beast ready to pounce. Brooke's heart hammered in her chest, not from fear of the unknown, but from the raw, electric rush of being swept away by the only man whose name she ever craved to hear when the world was closing in. Behind them, Nick stood rooted to the spot, his tuxedo jacket unbuttoned, rose petals from the shattered wedding bouquet drifting around his feet like crimson snowflakes. He stared after them, mouth agape, as Ridge threw a satin-skirted ramp onto the deck and hoisted Brooke aboard, his eyes ablaze with purpose. The champagne flutes still balanced precariously atop a silver tray as he closed the cabin door behind them, leaving nothing but an echo of scandal in his wake and a memory that would haunt Nick for the rest of his life. As the yacht cast off from the pier, cutting through the black velvet waters of the Pacific under a crescent moon, Brooke leaned against Ridge's broad shoulder, her breath coming in short gasps of exhilaration and disbelief. He wrapped a protective arm around her, shielding her from the chill of night air and from the ghosts of her past that lingered like indelible ink in every corner of her mind. Every sway of the vessel seemed to whisper possibility. Could she finally abandon the gilded traps of high society, the endless scheming and alliances, and live simply, just Ridge and herself, unburdened by legacy or expectation? Yet as the Starlight Intrigue bore them farther from port and farther from Nick's stunned betrayal, a shadow passed behind Ridge's eyes, as though the weight of 1,000 unspoken promises pressed upon him. Brooke turned to meet his gaze, searching for reassurance in the half-light that danced across his sculpted features, but he only nodded and guided her to the cabin's mahogany door. Inside, an envelope lay atop a single red rose on the polished table, a note from Ridge's brother Thorne, warning them that the press would descend within hours and that certain family members might not remain silent. Brooke's chest tightened. She didn't care about the tabloids or the flashing bulbs. All she wanted was a life unscripted, a love unbeaten by the barbs of society. Ridge slid the door shut and whispered, "Come with me," and his voice was all the invitation she needed. Within the cavern of Ridge's private quarters, a suite he had reserved for clandestine trysts when the world demanded discretion, the scents of citrus and sandalwood mingled with the warmth of candlelight. Ridge had left a dozen tall ivory tapers burning on every available surface, their flames flickering like silent sentinels guarding a promise built on the fragile foundation of two hearts. He took her hand again, leading her to the cabin's small balcony that overlooked the moonlit waves grinding in white caps against the hull. The balcony was strewn with rose petals, the same red that had bedecked her bridal paths hours earlier, creating a path from the cabin's threshold to the railing. Brooke's breath caught at the gesture's symbolism. Here, at sea, he was offering her both a departure and a return, a chance to rewrite their destiny far from the prying eyes of Los Angeles. Ridge turned to face her, the wind teasing strands of her hair around her cheeks like a lover's fingertips. His expression held every ounce of the fierce devotion that had driven him to abandon the world he had built for the fragile promise of a shared peace. "Brooke," he said, voice low enough that only she could hear it above the sea's soft roar, "I will give up the name Forrester, the company, the power, everything if it means waking up each morning beside you in a house by the sea, with no more secrets, no more walls between us." He paused, his eyes glistening with the prospect of a new dawn born from their scandalous flight. "I want a life that's ours alone, untethered by duty or betrayal. Will you come with me?" Brooke's throat closed as she stared into the fathomless depths of his gaze, feeling both the exhilaration of freedom and the pang of guilt for what they left behind. Her lips quivered, and she nodded wordlessly, knowing that her love for him had always demanded sacrifice. But as the words dissolved between them like breaths of mist, a movement caught Brooke's eye beyond the flickering candelabra, something darker than shadow, gliding through the lush potted palms that framed the tiny balcony. Under the pale glow of the half-hidden moon, she saw the silhouette of a figure, tall and slender, creeping along the garden below, balanced on the narrow ledge that connected to the lower deck. Her pulse thundered as her vision sharpened. The intruder slowed, hands splayed against the glass panes of the cabin door, and in that moment Brooke realized their haven had been breached. Her heart pounded not just with fear, but with the betrayal of trust that had begun before they even sailed. Someone knew of their plan. Someone had stalked their every move from Los Angeles to these secret waters. Ridge's arms tightened around her waist as she leaned into him, her gaze locked onto the stranger's unsteady form. The crescent moon, veiled by wisps of cloud, cast a sliver of light on the figure's face, and Brooke's breath hitched as recognition bloomed. This was no random predator. It was someone whose intentions could only be catastrophic. Nick Thorne? A press photographer desperate for scandalous proof? Or worse, someone from Ridge's past who refused to relinquish their claim on his loyalty? The wind carried a low, metallic groan as the yacht shifted with the current, and Brooke felt the fragile world they had fled shudder beneath her feet. She clutched Ridge's arm, desperation spiking through her, and he spun her behind him in a protective arc, jaw clenching as he scanned the darkness for a clue to the intruder's identity. Time seemed to stretch and warp as the stranger raised a hand and pressed against the glass, breathing fog onto the cold surface before pulling away. Ridge's muscles coiled with the instinct to fight, even as Brooke's pulse accelerated with the terror of exposed vulnerability. Behind them, the candles guttered as a sudden gust blew through the open balcony, unplanned, perhaps engineered to unsettle. Ridge's voice was a harsh whisper, "Stay here." He pressed his palm against the sliding door, and with a swift shove, it clicked shut, sealing them off from the unseen threat. Brooke's heart raced as she watched Ridge light-footed cross the cabin floor, the petals beneath his shoes hushed silent. He wrenched open the door a crack, the golden light casting his silhouette against the deck shadows, and peered into the inky blackness of the garden below. Brooke pressed her body against the cabin wall, hands skimming the smooth wood panels as she tried to stifle her panic. Outside, the rustle of fabric against railing, the soft drip of water from a coil of rope, and the faint scrape of boots across metal spoke of an intruder who moved with intent rather than accident. In the tense hush, Brooke's mind spun back to the chaos they had left behind. Nick's stunned betrayal on the dock, the cut ribbon of a wedding she would never wear. Donna's shattered bliss at Eric's apartment, learning that her husband had fathered a child she had quietly recoiled from, yet another secret that had fractured the Forrester, Logan tapestry, and Taylor, broken by guilt. Kneeling in hospital corridors as her daughter fought for life, without knowing her true lineage. She had every reason to despair of secrets ever cease, yet here, on a stolen yacht adrift beneath the half-moon, she had dared to hope that love might conquer every whispered lie. Now, exposed to peril at the first flicker of dawn, Brooke felt the fragile edge of that hope fray. Ridge's hand slid around the door handle, his figure tense as a panther ready to pounce, and Brooke clenched her fingers into the silk of her dress, bracing for the reckoning that would surely come. Minutes ticked by in agonizing silence before Ridge withdrew, the door swinging closed behind him with a soft click that resonated like a verdict. His eyes, dark and storm-charged, met Brooke's as he crossed the cabin to extinguish the remaining candles. "It was Nick," he said, voice low and raw. "He followed us." Brooke's breath hitched. She had known Nick's devastation would be fierce, but she had never imagined he would risk everything to trap them in this gilded prison of their own making. Her gaze dropped to the trail of rose petals now covered in wax, the candle stubs half melted, and she realized how tenuous their escape had been. "We need to decide," Ridge continued, "if we trust love enough to face the world, to face Nick's vengeance together." Brooke swallowed, her throat dry, vision blurred by frantically swirling emotions, fear at being discovered, guilt for the pain she had caused, exhilaration at the possibility of a new life, and the unquenchable urge to stand by Ridge, no matter the cost. The moon slipped behind a cloud, plunging the cabin into darkness, and Brooke reached out, taking Ridge's hand once more. The night closed around them as they braced for the storm that would surely follow, knowing that whatever dawn might bring, they would walk into it side by side, hearts bound by a love that would not be tethered by blood, legacy, or fear. In the hushed pre-dawn light filtering through gauzy curtains, the ocean breeze drifted in, carrying with it the distant cry of gulls and the soft susurration of waves slipping against the shore, setting a serene stage for the life Ridge and Brooke had chosen in secret exile. Ridge rose from the linen-draped bed and crossed the room to stand on the balcony where the scalloped edge of the deck overlooked the white sands and the endless, quietly heaving expanse of the Pacific. Brooke lay curled beneath the covers, eyelashes fluttering as she dreamed in the liminal space between memory and longing. Her heart still racing from the previous night's confessional as Ridge had vowed to forsake the Forrester name and its tangled dynasty to build a simple, honest life by her side. The candlelit rose petals still lay scattered on the polished teak floor, reminders of the passionate oath they had sealed beneath the waning moon, and Ridge inhaled deeply, reveling in the thought of mornings spent here with no boardroom battles, no whispered betrayals echoing through pristine hallways, just her laughter mingling with the gulls' cries across the still waters. Yet even as he savored that vision, his phone lay on the antique dresser, its screen dark but ominously charged with potential. He could almost convince himself that here, in this secluded haven, the world of power, pedigree, and painful history had no purchase. He pictured Brooke stirring, her hair tumbling over her cheeks in disarray, her gaze lifting to meet his with that radiant trust that had moved him to abandon everything he had ever known. And yet he could not silence the dull hammer of foreboding in his chest, the nagging sense that blood ties and duty would not allow him to remain forever untouched by the storm he had left behind. Before Brooke had fully woken, Ridge's phone beeped insistently on the smooth mahogany dresser, a single text alert bright against the dark wallpaper, emergency. His heart lurched. He moved to the bed and, with hands that refused to steady, typed a hurried reply. "What?" Almost immediately, the phone rang in his hand. He answered on the first ring, voice taut. "Ridge? It's Danielle from the Forrester residence. You need to get here right away. Your father's had a stroke. He's unconscious, blood pressure spiking. They've called for a helicopter." Silence pressed in as Ridge absorbed the words, his soul cleaving in two. A stroke. Eric Forrester, his father, mentor, father-in-law to so many, the architect of the empire Ridge had abandoned, lay vulnerable and alone, a man of iron now reduced to fragility. For a breathless moment, he stood frozen, phone pressed to his ear, the ocean's lullaby seeming to mock his paralysis. He cast a glance back at Brooke, still drifting between sleep and awakening, and felt the weight of every vow he had made to her crash upon him. Here lay the promise of a new life, untainted by the corporate machinations and private betrayals that had defined his existence. And yet beyond these walls his father lay stricken, his vast world teetering on the brink of calamity. Ridge's pulse thundered in his ears as he pressed his hand to his forehead, summoning the courage that had always carried him through razor-edged decisions, the same courage he would now need to divide his heart. Brooke's eyelids fluttered open at the sound of Ridge's voice, heart-rending and hollow, and the moment she saw his face, every trace of sleep fled as instinct and dread flooded her senses. She sat up, hair tousled, lips parted as she reached for him, but he held up a hand, eyes haunted. "It's Eric," he said in a low voice that trembled. "He's had a stroke. He needs me." Brooke's breath caught, her mind scrambling to align the stakes. Their stolen happiness by the sea, built on Ridge's defiance of blood and duty, now threatened as the patriarch of the Forrester Empire fought for his life under a hospital's flashing lights. She understood at once the impossible choice before him: stay hidden, preserve the fragile sanctuary they had carved out, protect the promise of a life that defied every expectation. Or return to the crucible of power and inheritance, to stand by the man whose collapse could unravel the company, the family, and the alliances that had defined his world for decades. Ridge's shoulders sagged as he grappled with the answer. "I have to go," he whispered, voice breaking as he looked at Brooke, his entire being torn between love and obligation. "I can't just let him," he stopped, pain flickering across his face. Brooke's heart ached in response. She rose from the bed and crossed to him, arms outstretched, voice firm even as tears glistened in her eyes. "Then let me come with you," she said, the words both plea and declaration. "If we face everything together, maybe we can still find a way to have both my place in your heart and your place at your father's side." Ridge pressed his forehead to hers, and for a heartbeat, the world ceased to exist beyond their embrace, two souls entwined at the cusp of impossible choice. But the phone beeped again, an ambulance ETA, coordinates for the nearest airstrip, a timeline measured in minutes, and reality crashed back in, cold and merciless. With a heavy breath, Ridge stepped back, eyes unwavering as he gazed at Brooke's tear-streaked face, the ocean's calm seeping through the windows behind her like a silent witness to their crucible. He reached for her hands and spoke, each word a shard of raw truth. "If I go back as myself. The son, the successor, the man who will be expected to fill my father's shoes, leaving this dream behind. If you come with me, you'll stand in the glare of the Forrester boardroom, in the halls where you were never meant to tread, beside a man caught between love and legacy. Are you ready for that?" Brooke's chest heaved as she swallowed the enormity of his question. In that moment, she saw the two paths laid out before them. One winding carefree along the coast, salt air and simplicity beckoning them to hide forever. The other a towering citadel of ambition, expectation, and family bonds that demanded sacrifice and resolve. She thought of Taylor's confession in the hospital corridors, of Steffi's anguished awakening to her true paternity, of the fracture lines that had already split their world apart, and she realized that no matter where she stood, there would be no escape from the reverberations of truth. She squared her shoulders, meeting Ridge's gaze with resolute clarity. "I choose you," she said softly, voice unwavering despite the storm that churned within. "No more running. I want to stand with you, whatever comes." Relief and anguish warred in Ridge's eyes as he closed the distance and enfolded her in a fierce embrace. The decision made, but the path ahead fraught with uncertainty. As they moved together toward the door, ready to abandon the security of anonymity, to board the waiting helicopter that would carry them back to Los Angeles and into the crucible of family duty, Ridge cast one last glance at the empty deck where their exile had promised salvation. The moonlight had receded, and the Pacific's surface shone pallid in its absence, as if the earth itself held its breath for the choice they had made. Brooke nestled closer, her hand finding his, and in the hush before departure they shared a final kiss, not of passion alone, but of solidarity, of a vow renewed in the face of peril, that no matter the forces that raged against them, blood ties or corporate storms, they would confront them together, bound by the love that had driven Ridge to forsake a dynasty and now compelled Brooke to embrace it as fully as she had once fled from it. And as the engines of the rescue helicopter thrummed to life on the beach below, carrying them back into the orbit of the Forrester Empire and the imperiled life of the man who had shaped every ambition in Ridge's heart, neither dared to imagine what awaited them. only that their unity in that choice would be their strongest bulwark against the trials yet to come.